I'm excited to welcome Mark Salway to iplicit's non-profit sector podcast today. Mark spent an entire career with over 25 years in both finance and the non-profit areas and has a wealth of experience to share with us. Tell me, what are the prevailing challenges that non-profits still face today?
Well, the challenges are actually pretty profound. Yeah, at the moment, especially because you've got cost of living crisis, you've got people really wanting more from charities because they want more services. And so actually charities are caught in this mindset at the moment, partly about survival and needing to survive, and partly about needing to reimagine themselves for the future. It's really clear at the moment, the biggest problem for charities is how do we get the money and how do we survive?
Let's talk about finance specifically in the finance department.
Sure.
Are there fundamentals that are seen in the commercial environments that just aren't being dealt with? You've mentioned reporting, but tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think we have to build a little model of the finance function. So at the bottom of the model, we're going to have transaction processing. In other words, how we process invoices, receipts, and all of the things we do with finances. The next level up is the control environment. In other words, how do we capture and catch the right transactions? How do we make sure they're being properly coded, properly invoiced, and accounted for at the right level? Yeah. The next level up is the management information. What do you get out of the system? And is it useful? Does it tell the right story? Is it timely? And then the final bit of this is the oversight. In other words, how does it help discussions about business models? How does it help you to cost and price properly? How does it help trustees to see both across cash flow, reserves, but also the activities you do and whether they make a surplus or a deficit? So this is my little model, if you like: transaction processing, control environment, management information, and then the strategic bit that sits at the top with oversight.
I'm often surprised that we find with a number of our customers, they once they put the system in, they extol the virtues of the speed in which they can report. And I learned firsthand that many, many reports take 2, 3, 4 weeks, and now they take a day. That was a struggle for me to really comprehend. Not something I'd come across in the commercial world before. Is that commonplace? Or is it expected that many reports will take weeks?
So getting a bit more geeky, a bit more technical, the average charity might take 4 to 6 weeks to close the information. Yeah, charity finance functions tend to think they want everything perfect before they'll actually close the month end. And so they take 4 to 6 weeks getting everything exactly right. Well, the problem is by the end of 4 to 6 weeks, it's not useful information. Yeah. Whereas the commercial sector is saying we need information that's good enough. Tell us roughly what the cash flow is, for example. They're going to close in 5 days. Well, think about that. 5 to 6 weeks versus 5 days. We're going to have to change quite profoundly our way of thinking in the charity sector to make sure that we've got the information to guide the organisations in terms of whether we're making a surplus or a deficit, whether we've got the reserves for the future, and then finally whether we've got the cash flow. And infrastructure becomes a huge part of that. Yeah. So do we have the IT systems? Do we have the finance systems? Can we see where we are going in terms of our money, for example? Yeah. And if we can't see, how do we get those tools so that we can see?
One of the big changes that we've seen, I think, is the advent of open APIs and integration with other systems. That, for me, is a change that we've seen brought about by cloud primarily, enabling systems to then have standards to connect. What is that process?
If you've got, let's say, a fundraising system that doesn't link to your finance system, you're having to rekey everything. That's just inefficient. So good finance systems nowadays have these links, these drivers that enable you to link your systems together and get the automation of the information to flow. Even if you don't have that, let's say, for example, payroll systems, the automated uplift, for example, from an Excel sheet straight into your system is something that every charity should have. Bank reconciliations, automated bank reconciliations, and the purchase order process are 2 areas where people really can benefit from technology. Purchase order, control environment, keeping it tight so you can sign off at the right level. Automated bank reconciliations so you don't actually have to manually tick things off. Taking time out of the equation. Yeah. And people, once they see these tools, go, it's a eureka moment almost, where they say, right, we need to change. It's then about the investment to get you there. It takes huge amounts of time out of processing each month.
You mentioned a lot of time-saving issues with regard to manual rekeying or reconciliation and so on. Obviously, good technology drives efficiency and saves a lot of time, as we've seen with our own system. Do you think there's any defensiveness within the average organization to resist time saving because people are doing those jobs? Or would there be a natural orientation towards repurposing those resources?
I believe that by upskilling and training, people will actually get more from the job. So what they see is, I want to change, I can see how I want to change, I'm going to go on that journey. But I think you need somebody to be the catalyst, or something to be the catalyst in there. So is there a reticence? Yes. Is there a natural stickiness and inertia? Absolutely. But I think by mapping out a vision and a roadmap, you help people to see how they can improve. They then want to go on that journey. They then want to improve.
Your experience has covered a vast array of non-profits, and to my mind, most of them seem really large. The Care Internationals, and I know you've been involved with Age UK and so on. Do you think your experience as an advice is the same for the very large to the mid-size?
It's pretty similar in terms of how you do things. There might be slightly lower levels of sign-off, for example. Or there might be a different level of sign-off because you've got only one person who can authorise things, but you still have to go through the same processes. And then the key things you need to know, the management information to help you see income and expenditure and whether you're creating a surplus or a deficit. Big or small charity, you absolutely need to know that. Cash flow, cash is king, yeah? You absolutely need to know the difference between cash, what that you've got in the bank and what it looks like for the future. Restricted, unrestricted money, how does that break down? Well, for a big or a small charity, it's exactly the same. Yeah. And then the final point, which is reserves and your balance sheet, well, you need to have an idea of that. And if you've got a good slice and dice software, you can cut it for projects, you can cut it for themes, for regions, for teams, also for the statutory accounts. Yeah. Get the system to do the work for you. Yeah. That's what you get from new systems, new tools.
Do you think there's a parallel within the commercial world and the non-profit with regard to management information and the ability to make decisions on what's coming down the track?
I think there's a blind spot there. Because the finance function has got the historic information out, that's good enough to run the organisation. But let's take, for example, pipeline. Unless you're looking forward, you don't know what's coming down the track. Let's say a large contract goes. Well, what then? What happens to the organisation and the charity's finances then? Yeah, does it create a big hole? How are we going to fund that, etc., etc.? And a lot of the charities that I get involved with don't do forecasting, don't do reforecasting through the year, and therefore aren't looking forward. So there's a process for close. We call it fast close. Get the information in the system, close. Yeah. There's a process then for forecasting, in other words, looking forward, or for reforecasting if there's any big or significant changes. Now, as we step into this next year, 2023 and 2024, that's going to be critical to survive cost of living and whatever recession we're going to feel going forward.
Let's talk about that forward thinking and the actual tools required then. Put yourself in the shoes of a non-profit CFO. And you've recognised that you need to do something.
Yeah.
How would you structure the process of transformation?
When I worked back at KPMG, they talked about a pyramid, yeah, where 50 to 60% of the time was on transaction processing. Controls were, let's say, 10 to 20%. Management information was 15%. And then, let's say, strategy and looking at business models was 5 to 10%. And they talked about inverting this pyramid. Yeah. So in other words, transaction processing became 10 to 15%, controls 20%, management information 50%, and the business model at the top, let's say another 10 to 15%. That's a profound change in the systems. So I think, for me, can non-profit and charity organisations completely go on that journey that KPMG talked about? Probably not. Yeah, I think they're a little bit more complex maybe than commercial organisations, but I do think you're talking, from maybe working like this in a pyramid to kind of like sort of this type of shape. Yeah, and I don't think that the average organisation I work with really understands the change you've got to go through to get there. And when you map out, if you like, the benefits in moving and what change is required, you see the eureka moment going on. We don't know enough. We've got to go and get somebody's help to be able to help us to change.
I know one of your big themes is impact and relating things to impact. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is really interesting for me because they talk about impact and social change, and you've got to align your work not only against the activities you do, but also against the outcomes you achieve.
Are there external bodies that can give guidance? Are there blueprints? Where does the FD or the CFO look to help bring his team with him?
You've got a lot of really good sector bodies doing lots of training. Part of the reason why I'm really excited to work with iplicit is we can have those conversations. We've got the time to help. Yeah. And you've got technical skilled people to help you to change, to help organizations to change.
If there is intent to transform the finance function, there is intent to move towards a modern day environment. How would you chunk that up to give people, again, effectively a blueprint of getting from A to B?
Yeah. So I mean, let's start by saying you never implement on bad process. Yeah. So if you're really going to do transformation properly, you need to start at that level, mapping out your processes and then seeing how they're going to change. Write the word process, write the word people, write the word technology. Then underneath that, map out what you think are the weaknesses, how you need to change. Yeah. And then once you've got an idea of what you need to do to improve and what the problems are in your organizations, get over the inertia to change and start to do something about it. The final thing for me is infrastructure. And Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is one of the most revered organizations globally in terms of charities, has started to call this a starvation cycle. That charities have invested so poorly in their infrastructure and their tools, they can't grow for the future. Yeah, we got to break that cycle. And I think funders have a big part in this as well by funding infrastructure properly. Yeah. So people, process, technology, getting on top of your activities, seeing if it creates a surplus or deficit. Do you have the right infrastructure? And then asking some big questions of your SMT or your trustee board, how are we going to change? Yeah. And I'm excited. I just want our sector to be better.
Great. Thanks for joining me. And hopefully this will be the first of many.
Thank you.